U.S. Constitution. Basically, it's just wrapping up some of the key points that our U.S. Constitution features. Uh, for example, let's start at just how it divides up the Constitution into sections. When the Founding Fathers were looking at what was really important, they tended to put the more important, more powerful things towards the beginning of the U.S. Constitution. They wanted to have the preamble at the beginning, so it would basically tell you why we have this U.S. Constitution, what's kind of the point of the U.S. government. Then they had the legislative branch first because they viewed it as the most important component because it represents the people. Then they have the executive branch in there, judicial branch in there, and as you go through these different parts of the Constitution, it seems like each section does get smaller as well. There's a lot of focus on Article 1, what the legislative branch can do and what it cannot do. Then there's a lot less on the executive branch, and there's very little on the judicial branch at all. It basically says that anything that wasn't given to the legislative, executive, or judicial branch is a power to the state. So it reserves some power for the states, but leaves it very. 5 through 7 are fairly specific. 5 tells you how you can amend the Constitution. 6 talks about the legality of the Constitution, and 7 is the ratification or the approval of the Constitution. And of course, there are 27 amendments after that. The first 10 being the Bill of Rights, and then 17 being added additionally when events arose where we needed changes. Itself is rather short. It is one of the shortest constitutions in the world, and it's short for a reason. And just to compare it to other countries, here's India's constitution, which has over 100,000 words and 300 some articles and 83 amendments. Really, the bigger your constitution is, the more detail it goes into. And the more detail it goes into, the more changes and difficulty you could end up with. The founders wanted to keep it short and time so that it would and be able to adapt to our changing world. And they knew it was changeable. So if things arose where they needed to change it, they could. So they didn't feel like they needed to put in every single detail at the beginning when they were creating this Constitution. Now, of course, our Constitution can be changed formally through the amendment process, which we'll talk about at the very end of this video. But most of the time, it's changed informally, which is just a change in how we use it, or a change in how we think about it. And what allows us to really change a lot of how our Constitution functions is just how ambiguous some of our clauses in the Constitution are. For example, there is what we call the improper clause, which is a clause in our Constitution that basically says that the U.S. Congress can do all things necessary and proper for protecting our nation and for protecting the U.S. Constitution and our country. And this is typically called the elastic clause because it allows Congress to kind of stretch its power into new fields and into new subjects as it sees fit. It also stretches its power using the commerce clause with any interstate commerce or any commerce between other countries in the U.S. And also the executive branch has some interpretation as they have control over whether or how to execute laws. Now, of course, in our Constitution, we also have some foundational beliefs like we have the U.S. power divided into 3 different branches. The legislative branch, which makes laws, and the judicial branch, which evaluates the laws and determines their legitimacy. Now, separation of powers is a key foundation of our U.S. Constitution. It's something that Madison pushed for, and he talked about in Federalist 51, how we're avoiding monarchy and we're avoiding tyranny by dividing up power, not giving it to any one branch, not giving it to any one person. We're creating a legislative branch that has the legislative power, executive branch that executes the law, judicial that interprets the law. So dividing it up was key for it up, but also making it so each branch would check another branch. And when I say check, I mean limit. So the legislative branch limits the executive branch's power and the judicial branch's power, and the judicial branch can limit both their power, and the executive branch limits both their power. So no one branch can become more powerful than the others because they can limit each other's. So for example, the legislative branch approves nominations to the judicial branch. The executive branch is the ones that come up with those nominations. So they both can influence the judicial branch in a way by choosing the people that end up there. Are decisions unconstitutional as going against the Constitution? Do have abilities to check each other. Can veto legislation from the legislative branch, and then the legislative branch can override those vetoes as they see fit as well. So they check each other out and they balance out the system. A few other features of our Constitution, it specifically lays out enumerated powers. These are powers that are specifically stated in our Constitution as belonging to a branch of our government. So for example, Congress has a lot of enumerated powers, powers that are specifically stated so they know what they should be doing or what they can't be handling. Now they may fall under some of those ambiguous powers, but there are powers that are reserved for the state and local government. So if a power is not given specifically legislative or executive or judicial branch, it is reserved for the states and local government. So stuff like roads and education is typically handled by the local government. And lastly, our U.S. Constitution once again has a process for changing it, for creating amendments. And it's not going to be on this test, as we'll talk about amendments a lot in more depth later on this year. But it's not an easy process to make an amendment to the Constitution. You have to typically get a 2/3 vote from our Congress, which you do. Then you have to get it passed through 3/4 of the state legislatures or 3/4 state conventions, which also probably have to be approved by the state. Easy to change the Constitution, but it is certainly possible to do so, which is why we've had those 27 changes when we felt like we really needed to change the Constitution. Well, that's all to understand some of the concepts we covered in class. Thank you.